Now, there's some other stuff I talk about in the videos. There's color to all this, but this is the moving parts that you need to understand. Any questions at all? Okay. So we're going to move on to discrimination next. And I'm not going to use numbers for discrimination because even though we use them in the videos and in the problem sets, there's nothing new in the numbers for discrimination. None whatsoever. You've used these kinds of numbers, you've modeled these kinds of curves before. Okay? And I think you can get it commonsensically with pictures and discussion just as well as the numbers are given to you. But you will have to use numbers in the review problems and in the exam and such, because this is a quantitative intensive class for the university. Okay, so I am a flag-waving, middle-aged white guy that I'm committed to my wife being barefoot and pregnant, and anyone who looks different than I do, certainly in color, absolutely in accent, and gosh, if their last name sounds like they come from a different part of the world than mine, then I think they are less than I am. I am a discriminatory pig in this scenario, okay? Now, recognize, I don't think I am any of those things. I'm just being this for a moment. I do not even seek to hire at the point that MRP of L is equal to marginal expense of labor, which you recall is a general market condition. And in a competitive market, that would be MRP of L being equal to wage. I don't even think about these things. It's not what I want. I decide, you know what, I need a bunch of workers, but it really pisses me off when I have to hire you guys that have a lot of hair. Okay? It just makes me mad. Okay? I don't like being around you. It reminds me of my younger glory days that I will never get back to, right? And we're still blonde women. Oh, good grief. From where do they get the will to live? Okay? But you're all I've got. And I need workers. I am not going to be a profit maximizer. I'm going to be a utility maximizer. And the utility I'm maximizing is my own personal satisfaction of knowing that I'm not treating you the way I could treat you if I paid you what your productivity was worth. Here's the way the model ends up looking. And there's two different models of what we might use to think about this. There is some labor supply of the type of worker that I need in this marketplace. That's always going to be there, right? There is, in this case, some labor demand, and there is some marginal revenue product of labor. And I know that there's discrimination happening because labor demand is to the left and below MRP of L. I know that these people aren't going to be paid what they're worth. Remember that I told you earlier when we dealt with labor demand that LD and MRP of L were the exact same curve in competition. But here, I have an LD and an MRP of L that clearly are not the exact same curve. So what that's suggesting is that I will hire based upon my demand, my perverted perhaps, demand for your kind of worker, and the supply that you give me in the marketplace. Such that I'm going to have some W star or L star. I like to think about them as W in discrimination and L in discrimination, but they're technically in equilibrium. But what else is going on here? I know that at that number of workers, I've got MRP of L that's greater than W star. In fact, W star, in this case, plus discrimination, is equal to my marginal revenue product of labor. So the wage I'm paying the disadvantaged worker, that I was willing to condescend to hire blonde, fair-skinned people, Courtney, so don't worry, you got a job, but you're not being paid anything close to what your productivity is. And by the way, we know it's discrimination, not just because of this, but because of how I'm describing you. Are you any more or less productive than, say, somebody that didn't have any hair? We're building houses here. What's the level of hair got to do with building a house? Right? So it's an observable characteristic, but it's a non-productivity observable characteristic. If I pay a lesser wage to someone than their productivity suggests because of their non-productivity observable characteristic, age, gender, gender orientation, religion, politics, skin color, last name, accent, if none of that affects their productivity, and I choose to pay them differently because of it, or hire fewer of them because of it, that's discrimination. So in the videos, in the material, I go through Civil Rights Act for you, I go through anti-discrimination codes and laws, lots of really interesting information that I will admit to you, there's probably not a lot of testing on that, but some of that might be very helpful to you when you do the essay on why do different workers receive different wages. That adds a lot of color, okay? I would pay attention to those things, but obviously when we're together on these nights, I try to help you just see the mechanics, which are sometimes a little harder to understand than the words, okay? So this is clearly a scenario in which we have a disparity. You're going to find that in the videos, I largely use the convention wages for female and wages for male, with females being the discriminated class, males not being, because that's the convention of labor economics, okay? Not because I think that one should be usurped by the other. And sometimes the convention shifts to wages for black and wages for whites, or wages for blacks and Caucasian. That's a convention and a construction issue for economics. It doesn't mean anything other than those are the kind of terms that we use to describe, because we've most often seen discrimination, male to female, black or Caucasian to black. Okay, they're the easiest ones to see. So this is one of our models. We got an interesting scenario. This is discrimination, but sometimes it's just exploitation. And exploitation can be negative because I'm exploiting you purposely because these non-productivity relationships, or sometimes it's just the marketplace. My wife, whom I adore, and is very bright and very productive, is, I think, quintessentially a middle to older age woman at this point, has a college education. She was at home with our children during, what, 25, 30 years as we were raising children, whatever it was. Didn't have a job outside of the home, and it wasn't until the kids were gone that she decided she wanted to do something with her time. Didn't like just being at home, so she went out and got a job. And she works at a place called the Cotton Shop. In fact, she manages one of the stores. We actually have an ownership interest in it at this point. But she gets paid, I think she pays like $13 an hour. She manages a retail location. She's got 15 or so employees. She gets $13 an hour. That's not very much, right? Is it because the owner, the primary owner is a gentleman who's third generation with this business in his family? Is it because he's discriminating? Or is there some exploitation of an inequality in a labor market? Exploitation. It's exploitation, Nate. The guy loves to hire middle-aged females. The Cotton Shop, as you might imagine, is all about sewing. In fact, these ones are actually all about quilting. Okay? So somebody as young as you are, Courtney, probably not all that into quilting at this point in your life. Now you might be, maybe not, but most young females and virtually no young males are into quilting, right? For whatever reason. He loves to hire middle-aged women. He loves to hire middle-aged women that were at home with their children after having received a college education and now are finally re-entering the job market. Because they're bright, they're productive, they're responsible, they are able to think, they've balanced I don't know how many kids at home and budgets, etc. And now all I've got to do is sell fabric, keep the place clean, and make sure the customers are happy. It's nirvana. He can pay them so little because that's all they require. My wife was certain that when she would get a job, that she wasn't going to make hardly any money because she didn't think she had any marketable skills because she'd been at home with kids for 25 or 30 years. So he's exploiting that niche in the market He's certainly not a discriminator. Whereas if a black female came that had all the same skills as the others, and if he said, no, I won't hire the black female, really I don't like working around them, that's discrimination. So you got to be able to think about the difference between those two. And sometimes the nuances are such it's really hard to know which is which. If I didn't know this gentleman well, I could easily see he's exploiting and taking advantage of a discrimination bias that has become acceptable to those workers and the market. There's another way we can think about this. There's a ratio or a quotient we can think about. And that quotient is the wages for females divided by the wages for males. If that equals 1, are we observing discrimination? We're not, because that means they're the same number, right? Okay. If it's greater than 1, what would that suggest? Well, if it's greater than 1, the numerator must be bigger than the denominator. That would suggest that females in this society, this market, get paid more than men. We don't see a lot of that, but we see it some types of work. Waitresses tend to make more money than waiters, especially in places that serve breakfast and lunch. Not as much in dinner places. I don't know why that is. If it's less than 1, now we know that the disadvantaged class somehow is female, not male. Well, if we think about it, you can model a market. And this, as we model this, these are numbers of firms, which create some demand. And here we have the quotient that's being measured on this axis. Okay? Yeah?
Is discrimination considered both ways on that?
If
Like in the
if it's anything but 1,
Yeah.
you could be observing discrimination. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there are scenarios in which increasingly males are beginning to feel and sense a level of discrimination that's foreign to them, foreign to us. We pretty much didn't feel that in most professional environments for a long, long time. But women, because of opportunities in the job market, because of recognition that women are equally as skillful as men at virtually anything they choose to be equally as skillful at, we are beginning to see some of those, so the pendulum swinging, if you will, okay? Which creates a whole set of problems all by itself. And we're beginning to see then the social uproar because of that as well. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Well, in a market that has some non-discriminatory employers, but some discriminatory, which I think is most markets, right? Let's say we lived in a market of 110 employers that create demand. Maybe 90 of them are non-discriminatory, and the remaining 20 have some level of discrimination. We could see them where this number is 1, this quotient is 1, and so all the employers, remember we got a number of firms here, all the employers that we're counting up this way are non-discriminatory. But we get to a point where this curve heads south because now we've gotten to where we have enough firms that now we're getting into those that are discriminatory as well. This firm, by the way, right here, is not as discriminatory as this firm, right? Because of the relationship to 1. So here, the WF, WM, where we're only a little bit less than 1, that employer is not as discriminatory as this one, where it's a lot less than 1. Well, okay, fine. If we have a market like this of firms, but our labor supply comes up like this, such that we've got some firms star, and you might see some equations on this, probably not. We know that in this particular market, there are enough non-discriminatory firms to employ all the workers that want to be employed at this wage relationship. If, however, we see, use a different pen, if we see the labor supply curve look like this, that means that there are enough workers in this market that some of them end up having to work for discriminatory firms. And so some of them work for some number where this is less than 1. So the disadvantaged class, whatever it happens to be, isn't being paid as much. So you might see it modeled like that. You'll see that within the videos. Okay. What else should we talk about? There's a couple of different kinds of discrimination. There's gender discrimination, age discrimination, racial discrimination. We're seeing more and more, or we did see for a while, pretty pronounced some gender assignment or gender preference discrimination. That's becoming less and less now. We're seeing more and more now some political and theological discrimination come back into our marketplaces. You also have customer discrimination and employee discrimination. I think the other kind is probably pretty obvious to you, right? What would be a customer discrimination? How might that evidence itself? So you guys are each, you're servers. No, you're attorneys in a law firm. And I decided I need some legal assistance, and you are assigned to my case by the managing partner. And customer, so I'm the customer here, customer discrimination is going to be where, oh, no thank you, I'd really rather have a guy. Right? Forget that you graduated first in your class at Harvard and you wax these guys' shorts at every term. I say, no, I need somebody more like you. That's discrimination, not from the employer, but from the customer, right? Employee or other types of workplace discrimination, the three of you, again, are lawyers, and you know that in order to move up the rung, to go from associate to junior partner to partner, is a collective effort. And Bailey and Nate say, hey, let's do that. Let's work together on this. We're going to exclude Courtney. Well, that's not the employer doing it. It's the employee that is holding someone back. Holding back an opportunity, holding back a wage. Those are the basic kinds of discriminations that we experience. I'd encourage you to take a close look at some of the material I have on the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act was clearly pivotal. It was 1964, and I give some good color on things that is historic for you guys. It's not historic for me. I was only 7 years old when the Civil Rights Act was passed, which means that I was a young teenager when all of its elements were finally being integrated. I remember that very well. I remember busing from one side of the San Jose Unified School District to another to even out the ratios. And I didn't get bused, but there were students who came into my school that were being bused from East San Jose, and they were principally Hispanic. So it's all history to you. I remember this stuff way too well.